but I understand Maine, is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
Well, we are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good, I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So ever since Trump's executive order, there have been states who are refusing to comply, even though the threat of losing their federal funding looms. They still insist on allowing boys to compete against girls in sports. They still insist in our schools on allowing this and on our college campuses. Well, it appears the universities in Maine are now beginning to comply because they don't want to lose their federal funding. That could have huge repercussions. So although they initially said we're following state law, we're doing nothing wrong, even though objectively speaking, completely doing away with categories in sports and allowing boys to compete against girls is doing something wrong. But they insisted on hiding behind state law and using that as an excuse to ignore federal law. Well, not anymore. Never thought it would happen so soon, but it has. The universities are now complying. Now, we have seen how they have doubled down on allowing transgender athletes to compete in women's sports. We have seen how women have been censored. Representative Libby was treated appallingly in the Maine House of Representatives, where she was censured and wasn't even allowed to give a speech detailing her reasoning behind some of the things that she did to highlight this issue. Speaking up for women and girls, she wasn't even allowed to do that. They have doubled down on this insanity. But apparently, no more, at least when it comes to the universities. And that's a sign of things to come. I really believe that. So the US Department of Agriculture announced Wednesday that the University of Maine system, UMS, has agreed to comply with President Donald Trump's executive order to keep transgender athletes out of women's sports. UMS, a network of 8 public universities in Maine, that is huge, claims it has been compliant with the NCAA's revised gender policy to keep trans athletes out of the women's category since the NCAA's revision was made on February 6, and has always followed state law and federal law. UMS was subject to a temporary pause in funding from the USDA last week during an ongoing battle between the state and the federal government over trans inclusion in women's and girls' sports. The funding was reinstated just days later. Now remember, they had 10 days to comply, the state of Maine. They had 10 days to show some sort of resolution concerning this issue to show how they were going to comply with the executive order and no longer allow girls to be subjected to boys in their locker rooms, to risking injury by competing against male athletes.
Maine became a focal point on the issue of transgender athletes after a student who transitioned from male to female won the state championship in pole vaulting in the girls' division last month. Now the Trump administration is giving the state 10 days to rescind its policy, allowing transgender athletes to compete in girls' high school sports as part of a proposed resolution agreement after it found the state violated federal anti-discrimination law. President Trump signed an executive order last month to exclude biological males from female-only sports. The order directs the Department of Justice to make sure all government agencies enforce a ban under Trump's interpretation of Title IX, a law against sex discrimination in education. In his statement, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services said it gave the Maine Department of Education, the Maine Principals Association, and Greeley High School in Cumberland, Maine, the 10-day deadline to take care of the alleged violation, or it would pass the issue on to the DOJ. The order comes after the start of a compliance review last month following a confrontation between Democratic Governor Janet Mills and President Trump at the White White House. The conflict put Maine into the national spotlight and recharged a debate over gender and sports, sparking protest in the state from both sides. Last week, the Trump administration reversed its decision to freeze U.S. Department of Agriculture funding to the University of Maine system after Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins intervened. The funding had been paused earlier in the week while an investigation was conducted to determine whether UMS violated federal civil rights law by allowing transgender athletes to participate in women's sports. In 2021, Maine legislators updated a state law to prohibit discrimination based on gender identity.
The USDA now claims the UMS is in full compliance with Trump's executive order, and that's wonderful news, it really is. After the United States Department of Agriculture initiated a Title IX compliance review regarding federal funding, the University of Maine system has clearly communicated its compliance with Title IX's requirement to protect equal opportunities for women and girls to compete in safe and fair sports, as articulated in President Donald J. Trump's executive order. The USDA said in its announcement, any false claim by the UMaine can and will result in onerous and even potentially criminal financial liability. So the UMS Chancellor Daniel Malloy also released a statement saying the University of Maine system has always maintained its compliance with state and federal laws with the NCAA rules, which the US Department of Agriculture also affirmed in a press release today. We are relieved to put the department's Title IX compliance review behind us, so the land-grant University of Maine and our statewide partners can continue to leverage USDA and other essential federal funds to strengthen and grow our natural resource economy and department rural communities through world-class education, research, and extension. So yes, unfortunately, the last administration allowed this. They wanted to rewrite Title IX. They attempted to do so. And they did rewrite it when it came to our college campuses and women's spaces on college campuses. And they were about to change it when it came to sports too. Didn't quite get around to that though, did they? But now we have a new administration. We have a president who wants to protect women's sports, protect women's spaces. And unfortunately, for some institutions, it has taken the threat of losing their federal funding for them to do the right thing. So we're talking about federal funding in the range of $29.78 million as they received last year. The USDA claims it has provided over $100 million to the UMS in recent years in a letter addressed to the system. And Trump initially vowed to cut funding to Maine specifically if it continued to allow trans athletes to compete in girls' sports during a meeting of GOP governors at the White House, February 20. And you know, we saw there how the governor, Janet Mills, told the president that she will see him in court. And he was like, okay. Just hours after that interaction at that meeting, the US Department of Education announced it would investigate the state. And the state were found to be in violation of Title IX.
Who we have talked a lot to about this particular subject and the idea of biological males in girls' sports. But to that mother, Nicole Georges, who first joined us on this program, she did tell us that that's what her daughter said, that after they took issue with biological boys changing in the girls' locker room, that then they were dragged in there and forced to have them change in front of them. We'll see how this plays out. But you know, how is it that there are not more adults in the room standing up for girls who are simply saying, let's keep biological girls in girls' locker rooms and biological boys in boys' locker rooms, and making it so difficult on these kids at what is already a challenging point in their life?
It's shocking to me that the adults surrounding these kids, whether we're talking about Illinois or in Maine, are taking this stance that it's okay for biological males to be taking girls' place, to be exposing themselves in a locker room and not protecting them. That's what's really shocking and heartbreaking here. Of course, in our state, we have Governor Mills and the legislative Democrats doubling down such that not only are our girls facing an unfair and unsafe and playing field, but also our federal funding is at risk, and rightfully so, because the folks in power here in Maine are not following Title IX.
Yeah, you highlight a lot of issues that play out when these lines are blurred. Remember, roll back the tape, this moment with the Maine governor and President Trump. It was an exchange at the White House in February. Listen.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't.
See you in court.
Every state, good, I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one.
All right, so now the White House is giving Maine 10 days to comply with the transgender ruling. It's telling Maine it has to rescind its policy of allowing transgender athletes to compete in girls' high school sports as part of this resolution agreement. So is this going to happen? Where do you see all of this going next as you are in it so closely?
While the Democrats have doubled down, we all saw the interaction with President Trump and Governor Mills. You know, I'd love to see folks do the right thing, and that would be reverse this policy, whether that's the Maine Principals Association reversing their policy, whether that is through the legislative process. We have 3 bills that will be coming before us in the legislature that could fix this issue easily, or even seeing a reversal of stance from Governor Mills leading the way for us to follow her lead and ensure that not only are biological males not allowed to participate in girls' sports so that our girls are protected and have a fair and level playing field, but also so that our students have the millions and millions of dollars that they need here in our school.
So that's what it comes down to, doing the right thing. Under no circumstances is it okay to force girls to undress in their locker room while a boy is present. That boy should never be allowed in the girls' locker room, and vice versa. Under no circumstances is that okay, and that should not be condoned in our public schools, in our universities. The adults need to get some sense and stop subjecting girls to abuse. That's what it is. They don't consent to undressing in front of a boy. They should never be put in that position in the first place. So no, we should not have our state governors, our school administrators being okay with that. And if they are okay with that, they certainly do not deserve federal funding. So I'm glad that these universities at least are leading the way in Maine. I hope the state governor gets some sense, because there is a lot at stake when it comes to these institutions receiving their federal funding. When it comes to the state receiving its federal funding, there's a lot at stake. And it will be a pity to lose your federal funding because you want to die on such a bizarre hill to die on. Because you're insisting on being on the wrong side of history. Because you're insisting on being complicit in the abuse of girls and women in your state. Don't go down the same path as Illinois and what they're doing and what they're subjecting their girls to within the schools in that state. Maine has already taken the steps to do the right thing. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.